I used to think humiliation had a sound. The brittle ping of crystal against crystal in my own living room, the paper-thin laughter of men I had paid well and promoted higher, the slosh of 30-year-old scotch I had bought, poured into mouths that shaped my name into a punchline. At 38, after a decade of building and hiding and building again, I learned it also has a temperature, the cool slip of cut glass in my palm, while I kept still letting their jokes move around me like a draft. They called me jobless. They smirked about my interviews. My husband, 8 years married vice president, by the grace of my blindfold, loosened his tie and told a story he's told too many times about the day I flamed out at his company's HR desk. The irony landed like a second clink of glass inside my ribs. I had designed that desk. I had chosen the grain of that wood. I had built the building that housed it all, and then taught myself how to disappear inside it. No, I didn't open my mouth that night. When mockery circles you like wolves, the worst mistake is to taste your own tail blood and thrash. I smiled the way a woman smiles when she has learned the cost of proving herself to men who prefer you quiet and grateful. The men noticed everything but the subtle. They saw the dress but not the calculus. The weak smile but not the ledger I'd been keeping for a year in a locked study behind a hidden wall panel. The one that opens with a touch if you know exactly where your fingerprints have been all along. While they roared over a new promotion, I ran through the files in my mind. Expense reports that puffed themselves up like show dogs. Midnight calendars tagged with first names and hotels Slack messages that felt too harmless until you read them in sequence and watched them become a rope. I remember the first time I lied about who I was on purpose. 8 years ago, standing under a chandelier that made everyone's skin look expensive, I told a handsome stranger I was a freelance consultant who couldn't quite catch a break. I tucked my car keys, modest forgettable, into a little zip pocket and kept the stories small and soft. I had already dated 3 men who loved me most when they thought I was an ATM that apologized. I wanted to see who he'd be if he believed I wasn't a trophy. He was attentive then, almost tender in the way men can be when they think you're pliable. We married quickly. Then he moved into a house he thought his salary had helped buy, and began to correct me in front of guests so gently at first that even I said thank you. My father used to say success was a voice you hold in your throat like a note only you can hear. He lost his small shop to men who pronounced leveraged like a blessing and synergy like a verdict. I learned from his wreckage how to build a company like a fortress with trapdoors and quiet sightlines. I'd founded Reynolds Technologies at 26 with more resolve than sleep, and when the first vultures swooped in with smiles and offers, and men who insisted on a public face for the brand I created one. A cipher. A founder who never appeared in person, a CEO seen only through the fog of encrypted calls. I let my board meet my voice and my mind, but not my face. I learned to speak like a rumor and sign like a ghost. Meanwhile, I took a name that wouldn't ping a wardrobe that read as ordinary in a room full of men who graded women by sparkle. I became the wife who looked like she needed permission to dream. If you wonder whether hiding costs you anything, the answer is yes, it devours tenderness first. Every time I bit my tongue when James held court, my husband with his palm pressed to the air, as if he'd invented gravity, I felt the ache of everything unsaid. Every dinner party, where my idea was something he gently corrected into his own, every late night, where he laughed about the girl who tries too hard while I cleared plates I had chosen and paid for, put another pebble in my pocket. I carried them all until I could feel the weight of a shoreline inside my coat, and then quietly, I started measuring. There are kinds of rage that burn so hot they leave you ash, and there are kinds that turn into precision. Mine became a metronome. It clicked through months of investigate, verify, cross-reference. It steadied my hand as I built nests for evidence, anonymous reports brought to my desk via 3 intermediaries, time-stamped photographs of boozy lunches that somehow billed themselves as client meetings, the way James's portfolio swelled within 24 hours of confidential decisions. I never loved math, until I realized it was a way to fix men to their own actions without raising my voice. The night before the storm, I excused myself from the room. He filled with laughter and walked upstairs to the study he never entered because my little hobby made him itchy. The panel slid back beneath my fingers. The monitors woke like obedient stars. I read the texts from my operations lead, confirming the morning's choreography. Security briefed, legal on standby board assembled. I took the ring off my finger just to feel the skin breathe. I didn't cry. There comes a point where tears feel like paying a bill twice. Sleep found me like it had a key. Morning swept the hangover out of his eyes while I watched from the doorway, the kind of quiet a woman can manage when she has already replaced the future he thinks he holds. I left before him. I walked into my company through a door no one thinks matters, wearing a navy suit that flattered invisibility. I sat where candidates sit and let an HR rep talk to me like a person he had decided 2 minutes in not to hire. I made small mistakes on purpose. Through the glass, I could see my husband walking by, phone in hand, sending messages I could predict word for word. He'd never learned there are two kinds of power, the kind that announces itself, and the kind that waits and writes everything down. At noon, I unzipped the garment bag hidden in the last stall of the women's restroom and climbed into my life. Tailored suit. The badge with my real name embossed into the metal like a promise. The heels that would announce me down a corridor before I had to waste breath on an introduction. I looked at my face in the mirror, the woman he had rehearsed dismissing, and watched her settle into the gaze that built a company while men like him applauded each other. I walked out of that restroom, and the air changed around me. It always does when someone finally stops pretending to be smaller than she is. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was louder than the hum of the lobby. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. For years, I had been a rumor inside these walls, a founder's name on the documents, a ghost on the conference calls, a voice disguised through layers of intermediaries. Now in flesh and blood, I walked toward the boardroom with the kind of certainty that made even the seasoned executives shift in their seats. James was already there, of course. He sat near the head of the long oak table, flanked by the friends he had championed into positions they were never qualified to hold. He was laughing, phone face up, gesturing with a glass of water as though this room was his to command. Then he looked up. Our eyes met. For the first time in years, I saw him blink before he smiled. Sarah, he said, his tone one of practiced disbelief, as if my presence here was the punchline of some private joke. What are you doing here? I didn't answer. I simply took the seat at the head of the table. Gasps rippled down the line of executives, lawyers, and advisors. Jonathan, my trusted COO, who had been with me from the beginning, slid a folder in front of me. Embossed on the cover was the crest of Reynolds Technologies. My name, my full legal name, gleamed in black ink, founder and CEO. James laughed too loudly. This is some kind of mistake. A stunt. Tell them. He glanced at his friends, waiting for their chuckles of agreement. None came. I opened the folder, flipped through the pages, and placed the shareholder certificates on the table. This, I said evenly, is the mistake. Promoting your drinking buddies. Filing falsified expense reports. Treating my company like your private playground. The room went still. His face drained, then flushed red. Your company, he spat. Don't embarrass yourself. Reynolds Tech is mine. The word cut through him like glass. Every patent, every line of code, every contract. Mine. You thought the face you saw in meetings was the one pulling the strings. No. That was my choice. I built this fortress in silence. I watched who you became when you thought I was powerless. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. His friends shifted uneasily, sweat glistening on brows that had always leaned too heavily on James's bravado. I nodded toward security at the back. 2 men stepped forward, placing sealed envelopes in front of each of James's allies. Termination letters. Their mouths opened in protest, but the words died when they saw the legal team seated along the opposite wall. James shot to his feet. You can't fire us. You don't even work here. You're nothing without me. The laugh that escaped me was soft, dangerous. You've spent years mocking me for not having a job. All that time you never realized I was the one signing your paychecks. The board erupted in murmurs. Cameras clicked. Phones buzzed as the news spread like wildfire through the building. James's mask cracked in real-time confusion to rage to panic to something small and pitiful. I stood sliding the ring he once placed on my finger across the polished wood until it landed in front of him with a sharp metallic clink. "We're done, James. As husband, as employee, as parasite. You're finished here." Security moved closer. His friends, the ones who had laughed loudest when I was the joke, were escorted out one by one, their protests echoing down the hallway. Rebecca, the HR manager who had whispered behind my back for years, dropped her eyes as her badge was taken. One by one, the wolves were led out of the pack. James's voice cracked, stripped of power. You planned this all along." I met his gaze without flinching. "No, you did. Every cruel laugh. Every time you dismissed me. Every time you stole credit, cheated trust, or mocked my worth. You built this moment with your own hands. I'm just here to finish it." His shoulders sagged as the security guards flanked him. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a man who had won. He looked small, exposed, undone. As the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. Jonathan leaned toward me, his voice low but steady. "It's over." But as I sat back down in the chair that had always been mine, I knew it wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of reclaiming not just my company, but my voice, my worth, my truth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the weight of humiliation slip off me like a coat I would never wear again. When the door shut behind James, the silence that followed was heavy, like the first stillness after a storm. Everyone in that boardroom sat straighter, waiting, gauging the new landscape. I could feel their eyes on me, some full of respect, some calculating, some shocked that the woman they had once overlooked was the one holding all the strings now. I folded my hands on the polished wood and let the pause linger. Power lives in silence, not in shouting, and I had learned to weaponize it the way James had once weaponized my quiet. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, deliberate. "The era of corruption and carelessness ends today. If you stay, you work for me, not for favors, not for handshakes under the table. For me, for this company, and for the future we build with integrity." A murmur rose around the table. Some nodded eagerly. Others shifted uncomfortably. I could read their faces like an open book. Those who thrived under James's reckless reign were already calculating their exits. Those who had suffered silently were allowing themselves the first flicker of hope. Jonathan slid a document in front of me drafted weeks ago, awaiting only my signature. It was a restructuring plan, one that cut out the dead weight and promoted the overlooked talent who had been grinding in the shadows. I signed it with a stroke of the pen. The room erupted with a mixture of relief and unease. Later, I walked the hallways of my company, the space that bore my fingerprints in every detail. Employees glanced up from their screens, whispers following me like ripples. Some recognized me from years ago, when I had been the quiet woman in the background. Others stared in awe, realizing for the first time who I was. For years, they had thought of me as someone's wife. Now they would know me as their leader. That night, when I returned home, the house felt cavernous and unfamiliar. His absence was a relief and an ache all at once. I stood in the kitchen staring at the glassware still faintly smudged from the party where they had mocked me. The echoes of their laughter had haunted me for months, but tonight I realized something: the ghosts of humiliation only linger when you give them a home. So I opened the cabinet, lifted each glass, and dropped them into a black trash bag. One by one, the sound of breaking crystal became a new kind of music, an ending disguised as cleansing. Emma. My daughter came into the kitchen barefoot, her hair messy from sleep. "Mom," she asked softly, "are you okay?" I turned to her, shards glinting in the bag at my feet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to lie. "Yes," I said, my voice catching. "I'm finally okay." Her arms wrapped around me, warm and solid, and I realized what James had never understood. Power isn't in the titles or the paychecks or the applause of men who don't matter. Power is in the love you protect, the dignity you refuse to surrender, and the courage to stand up when the world expects you to sit down. In the weeks that followed, James tried to claw his way back. Emails, voicemails, even a lawyer's letter threatening to challenge my authority. But every threat crumbled against the mountain of evidence I had collected. The board closed ranks around me. The employees rallied. His allies scattered like rats from a sinking ship. By the time his last message arrived full of rage and desperation, I didn't even bother to read it. I deleted it with a single click, just like I had deleted the fear he once inspired. Revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it's in the way you reclaim your own name, in the way you stand unshaken while the man who thought he owned you falls apart. Sometimes it's in the quiet dinner with your daughter, laughter filling the kitchen where humiliation once lived. And sometimes it's in the knowledge that the best justice isn't just taking someone else down, it's rising so high that they can never touch you again. In the months that followed, my life transformed in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. For so long, I had carried the weight of pretending to be smaller, quieter, less capable than I truly was. Now every day felt like peeling back another layer of silence and breathing freely again. Reynolds Technologies blossomed under new leadership. The restructuring cleared out the deadwood James had planted, and in their place, I promoted people who had been overlooked, the ones with grit in their eyes and loyalty in their work. Meetings that once reeked of arrogance and complacency now buzzed with fresh ideas, genuine collaboration, and a kind of respect that didn't need to be demanded, it was given. And still James lingered like a stubborn shadow. The divorce proceedings were ugly predictable. He claimed I had tricked him, deceived him, that I had stolen what was his. But every time his lawyer hurled an accusation, my legal team answered with facts, contracts, and evidence he could never erase. Watching him in court was like watching a man choke on the lies he had once swallowed so easily. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal session, he cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom. His face was pale. His suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot with the panic of a man who had lost control. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "You'll regret this. No one humiliates me and walks away." For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered the countless nights I had cried myself to sleep while he drank and laughed with his friends, the mornings when he mocked me in front of our daughter, the years he chipped away at my spirit. I leaned in just close enough for him to see the fire in my eyes. "The only person who humiliated you," I whispered, "is yourself." His mouth opened, but no words came. He turned away, shoulders hunched, a man undone. That was the last time I saw him before the judge's gavel ended it all. When the divorce was finalized, I stood outside the courthouse with Emma at my side. The sky was wide and bright, the kind of blue that feels like a clean slate. She looked up at me, her hand slipping into mine. "Mom," she said softly, "we're free now, right?" I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we're free." But freedom wasn't just about walking away from James. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had buried for too long. I started painting again, colors splashed across canvas with the kind of abandon I hadn't allowed myself in years. I traveled with Emma, showing her places I had only ever dreamed of when I was stuck pretending to be less. And slowly, the laughter returned to our home, the real kind, not the brittle kind that covers bruises. Sometimes late at night, I would sit on the porch with a glass of wine, listening to the quiet. My mind would wander back to those humiliating parties, the sneers, the mocking. And I would smile, not because the memory no longer hurt, but because I had survived it, because I had risen from it, because I had turned every cruel word into fuel for my fire. Revenge, I realized, isn't about destroying someone else. It's about rebuilding yourself in such a way that they can never touch you again. James may have thought he stripped me of power when he mocked me for not having a job. But in truth, he handed me the perfect disguise, the perfect cover to plan his undoing. And when the moment came, I didn't just fire him and his friends from my company. I fired them from my life, from my future, from the narrative they thought they controlled. If you're listening to this now, if you've ever felt belittled, underestimated, or mocked into silence, I want you to hear me. You are not weak for staying quiet while you plan. You are not foolish for hiding your strength until the moment is right. And when you finally rise, don't rise just for revenge. Rise for yourself, for your freedom, for the future they told you didn't belong to you. My story isn't just about betrayal. It's about rediscovery, about finding my voice again, and teaching my daughter that no one, no husband, no friend, no colleague gets to define her worth. So if this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment with your own story because your voice too deserves to be heard. Together we rise stronger from the ashes of betrayal.